Session on the birth of Eritrea after 30 years of armed struggle. Many people in this room took part in that, and what went so wrong after independence was achieved. Our speaker, but he isn't here, is Ambassador Haile Menkerios, who I'm sure all of you are aware of his history, but just to run through it, he was obviously an important part of the independence struggle, and then became the head of the United Nations Office for African Union and a special representative to the African Union. So he's been very much, his gaze has been focused on international global affairs. And at the UN, at the African Union, he was also Under Secretary General from 2013 to 2018. So since Haile Menkerios can't be here, Paulos Tesfagiorgios is going to be reading his message and then commenting a little bit on it before we have Q&A. I'm sure most of you know Paulos. He helped draft the first constitution of Eritrea, post-independence constitution. He's been a senior advisor on democracy and constitution building at IDEA, based in South Africa. And you're going to sort of read out Ambassador Haile Menkerios' message and then give us your remarks. So please, Paulos, come on.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I do not have a strong voice, and I thought we were going to have some. But I would like to express my appreciation and admiration for Eritrea Focus for bringing such important people at a very critical time to discuss such an issue of, as you said, what happens. The persons, the government, the institutions that were put by this person are gone or are going. So what happens? I have a very difficult task here, at least one of them, and that is to read Haile Menkerios' message, because I cannot do justice to Haile with all his experience, and not only in sending something, but also in kind of question and answer with Haile. It would have been fantastic. I met Haile in February in Nairobi, and that 1 hour discussion what we had about Eritrea, about the region, and of course beyond, was fascinating. So that is a very difficult task. Fortunately, I'm also allowed to build on it, to also give my opinion on what Haile started, because I also would like to be loyal to his input, but still also have my input, what I think is where we are, where we can go, and how we should be going. So this small 2 pages is really, a message of solidarity, rather than, with certain, key messages. So this is Haile calls it message of apology to the organizers. Dear organizers and participants in the Conference on Democracy in Eritrea, let me start by expressing regret for my inability to participate in this conference. It is indeed timely to discuss the need for building democracy in Eritrea, a country which has the notoriety of being perhaps the only country in Africa that does not have a functioning constitution, a legitimate or elected government, or legitimate and functioning government institutions that ensure accountability. Generally speaking, other liberation movements that won independence or liberation through armed struggle have also established one-party dictatorships with varying degrees of accountability to the general public. A key characteristic of the political parties that were established by these former liberation movements is that they control the army, the police, the justice system, institutions, and it was these institutions that also became institutions of state. The distinction between institutions of the party, government, and state disappear. It's the same with Eritrea. In such countries, building democracy with public institutions independent of direct control of political parties is an outcome, yet that is not normal. In this, Eritrea is perhaps unique only in degrees. Eritrea's particular history and experience of decolonization has contributed to the unique nature of governance that has been established in Eritrea, a one-man rather than a one-party dictatorship. The basis for this was, in Haile's opinion, the nature of the struggle we had to wage, a struggle against a much bigger and stronger Ethiopia, supported by African countries, by the West, by the East, a peculiar characteristic. The enemy we had to fight was so formidable that getting rid of it consumed the major part of our energy. And we, when Haile says we, he's talking about the fighters, the EPLF combatants, did not exert much effort to adequately plan and prepare for what and how to build once the enemy was defeated. Indeed, we built a very efficient fighting machine in the EPLF with absolute discipline and hierarchical system as an effective military. Despite the prevailing rhetoric during the struggle, the EPLF did not encourage debate and discussion to develop concrete ideas about our future after independence and establish institutions or safeguards to ensure their implementation. What was our strength as a collective, as a coherent body, became our weakness after independence. For better or for worse, those of us who participated in the rhetoric, in the heroic struggle of the Eritrean people for independence, contributed to the development of the dictatorship we are now. So I'll just kind of finish Haile's paper, because Haile makes a couple of important points. One is because we're consumed with the military aspect of the struggle, because we're fighting a mighty enemy, we do not adequately prepare for after independence or for independence. Secondly, Haile suggests that in thinking about how to move forward, we consider going back to what we could and should have done in 1991, immediately after independence. That is, call for a national conference of representatives of the Eritrean people that would decide on a transitional arrangement to ensure an inclusive process of building participatory democracy in the country. I believe, Haile says, only such a process can prevent violence. Then Haile says, I wish you success in your discussions to contribute to democratization in Eritrea. So basically, this is Haile's message. As I said, Haile should have been here because nobody can really replace Haile by reading a 1.5 page message. The other aspect is I would like to appreciate and thank the organizers for allowing me to still loyal to Haile's message, but also say something about my feelings my observations and my thoughts. Ambassador Haile rightly says the enemy we had to fight was so formidable that getting rid of it consumed a major part of our energy. Therefore, we could not prepare. Indeed, we built a very efficient fighting EPLF. A highly effective military was an absolute necessary not only for our success as Eritreans, but also for our survival. There was no other way out in the case of Eritrea. No serious negotiations was being held between the Derg and Eritrea or EPLF. Thus, the only way was to bring a total liberation. And the only liberation movement in Africa that succeeded only militarily was Eritrea, was EPLF. And of course, I do not need to explain to everybody how that happened because we are all now. But the EPLF was not only a military organization. It had a civilian side to it: health, education, infrastructure, agriculture, and on the political side, mobilizing and organizing the people. And it also promoted a beautiful vision, a vision of a peaceful, democratic society in which everyone can contribute and prosper. It was this vision, as far as I'm concerned, that its members believed in and fought for. In independent Eritrea, it says, this is the EPLF charter that came, alongside from, that developed from the congresses. It is our basic desire to build a stable political system which respects law and order, safeguards unity and peace, guarantees basic human rights, and is free from fear and oppression. A democratic constitutional system based on sovereignty of the people, on democratic principles and procedures, on accountability, transparency, pluralism, and tolerance. It's a beautiful vision. And this is the vision that kept many people to fight. Many people who came from different walks of life. People who were not pushed to go to fight. People who would have fantastic life somewhere else. There was a vision. What happened to that vision? Unfortunately, that fantastic vision depended absolutely upon a strong military to deliver independence. And therein lies the fatal contradiction. You have this absolute military organization and you have this fantastic vision. How do you marry these two? How does the liberation movement, which is so utterly dependent upon its military, deliver this vision? Can it have that vision? How does that happen? It's something very, very, interesting. Tragically, it was this vision and the hopes that Eritrea fought for that were betrayed. The need for absolute discipline took precedence over the need for democratic debate to develop collective vision and concrete ideas about our future after independence. Immediately following our extraordinary victory, there were important attempts to implement that vision. The most important being drafting of the Constitution and adopting of the Constitution of 1997, drafting election laws, and attempt to reform all the laws of Eritrea, all the laws that we inherited from Ethiopia. There were attempts, but far from giving way to a new democratic rule. The culture of absolute obedience and military superiority continued to dominate Eritrean society after victory. That militarism continued. All attempts to establish institutions of democracy or democratic safeguards that were essential for this vision were quashed. Anybody who attempted to move towards building those institutions or even debating were either put in prison or had to flee the country. So where are we now? Where do we go from here? At present, Eritrean society and the economy has virtually disintegrated. Fight of youth across the borders has complicated the demography with huge implications to social and economic development. Isaias's divide and rule policies and practices, even among his own people, his own generals, his own whatever, meant absolute one-man rule. This opening that provided by peace with Ethiopia has been squandered, and now Isaias himself is thoroughly discredited because there is no excuse now. There is no border. In the eyes of Eritreans, Isaias cannot stay in power any longer. What do we do? So what happens when Isaias is no longer? How can democratic changes be instigated? And by whom? It's important to take challenges faced by both domestic and foreign if you really want to go forward. Domestically, our limited experience with open democratic dialogue and practice. Never had that. You can go back and seriously will see the deficit in our history, starting from Italians, British, and like that. We have a fragmented society or social order, ruined economy, paralyzed institutions, and absence of practice of civil or civic participation in matters of society. Civil servants in Eritrea, resorting to corruption, to, or contraband to augment their income. Lawlessness abounds, even human trafficking in Eritrea. A frightening and dangerous situation of desperation. People are desperate. Acute contradictions in society, everywhere. Conflicts and divisions surfacing in our society. Externally, we live in a regional system of dynamics that militates against stability and peace, with lack of strong and deep democratic culture in the region. The current ethnic-based tensions, unrest, and sporadic eruption of violence in Ethiopia might affect us. That's where we are. Continued state of weakness in Somalia, in South Sudan, terrorism, spillover effects in the region, and potential foreign intervention. We have the Saudis, we have the Emirates, we have Egypt. Why not Ethiopia? There could be. We got to prepare for it like that. And all this can have their impact in the country and on any transition that we can potentially, move forward, because this can create chaos, confusion, violent conflicts, which might usher extremism of various types. What possible scenarios post Isaias? Who can take over power from Isaias? It's impossible to predict what might happen and why, and why. In general, anything can happen anytime. Are we prepared? Eritrea is faced with a situation where freedom of association, expression, and exchange of opinion, especially as a group, is absolutely denied, preventing collective reflection, let alone systematic planning and concrete preparation for post-Isaias. That does not happen. So how do you prepare? Under circumstances, the military alone can take over, or senior military commanders and senior party officials. Not that they care about the country, but more for self-preservation, for individual interest, because they have committed a lot of crimes and they know about it. And however, we are faced with a military situation. Though the military might take over, we are faced with a military institution, that is weak that is falling apart and that is distrusted by the people and that distrusts each other? Or can we think change provoked by civil disobedience, although organized civil life is non-existent, no student group or movement, no professional association, no social clubs like in the Sudan, for example? I would also like to point this out. The process by which a system is replaced and the conditions that prevail afterward often determine the framework and process of stable or unstable transition and democratic or non-unit governance. How the system, one-man rule, is replaced will dictate what's going to happen. If the military comes, it's a different thing. If civilians come, different thing. We need to think about that. Then I would like to go into that call for national conference of Ambassador Haile, because he says or suggests that we call for a national conference of representatives of the Eritrean people that would decide on a transitional arrangement to ensure an inclusive process of building participatory democracy in Eritrea. And he says that's the only way to avoid chaos, conflict in the country. As important as it is, I don't think that's simple. I don't think that's simple. Because it raises many questions and requires careful preparations, including practical steps. Who can organize such a conference? Who identifies the participants? More importantly, who identifies the challenges that this, national conference has to engage in? What is it going to talk about? Of course, when is this National Assembly going to happen? Today? Tomorrow? After the fall of dictatorship? It's important. But talking to Ambassador Haile, he says that this national conference, should be held immediately after the fall of the dictator. This national conference that Ambassador Haile suggests will have to contend with post-dictatorship and post-conflict situation. Post-dictatorship and post-conflict, because really it's only a few months ago or 9 months that we are free from conflict. We've been in conflict all the time. So we got to take that into consideration. A transition also from a long period of state of no war, no peace, an authoritarian system, a highly personalized rule, and an exclusionist state. We want to move to a peaceful, stable, democratic polity, and an inclusive state where the rule of law is supreme. How do you do that? This transitional council or People's Assembly, whatever we call it, really to look into how to establish or re-establish, we had one, a functioning government. That's very important. Build a free and fair political rules and systems, and of course institutions. Develop civil society and a robust legal infrastructure that fosters public confidence in the institutions of government. Do we trust the police? But we have to trust the police. The courts, do we trust them? But we have to eventually trust them. And all the different institutions. People who come from there tell you no ministry functions. People go and sign, and the interesting thing is now, because people are disappearing, they are asked to sign 4 times a day now. But nobody cares, right? So what happens is that people disappear, and they sign for 4 days on the 5th day. They go on Friday and sign for 5 days, because nobody cares. So that means that nothing is functioning. We have to examine structural institutions or patterns that have or might have inevitably arisen from a long and persistent authoritarian or dictatorial rule. For example, rule by security apparatus. That is what is actually in Eritrea, not the civilian institutions. We also have to address crimes that have or might have been committed during the period of dictatorship, healing potentially lingering hostility and divisions with society, so that reconciliation can take place. We need to address that. In short, the creation of the conditions that require for a democratic governance in an open society should take root. In addition, it needs to prepare this conference to address post-dictatorship issues of freedom, safety, and well-being of the individual, dignity and self-realization. Okay. And we also have to look, what does transition mean for the lives of the people, for the region, and also like that. We have to look into that. Repression and its consequences. Okay. How to move forward in 1.5 minutes. The question again arises, are we really, even those who are outside, in diaspora, our professionals, our politicians, are we really adequately prepared for change, for stable, peaceful, democratic transition? Haile says that's very important. Or are we going to say we need to, we could not really prepare because we in the diaspora, for example, been consumed by fighting the dictator in Asmara? Is that all? Would that be acceptable? Therefore, I suggest that we need to develop analytical framework for key, priority issues of transition. How? It has to be knowledge-based. It has to be properly developed. We got to prepare issue papers and discuss it and debate it and disseminate it in different languages. B, strengthen civil groups, the youth and especially women, to engage in stable transitions, in transformations, of course in peace development, not only within Eritrea, but within the sub-region as well as the region. This we can discuss though. And through this promote informed public discourse, advancing understanding on transitions, on peace building, on democracy and development, and all that like that. Now, it's easy to say all these things. How? How do you implement this? And of course, there are many other ideas. How do we implement? What are the mechanisms of implementation? What institutions exist at the time? Now, I would like to, since we are here, challenge Eritrea Focus, of course in cooperation, in collaboration with others, to act as the hub, as the organizing institution for all this. Because we have to define research papers, we have to translate them, we have to disseminate them, we have to bring our intellectuals, our politicians together to discuss this. Who can do it? I'm challenging Eritrea Focus to do it. And I could go on that. This challenge that we have is enormous. Time is a luxury that we do not have. And demand from our people is for immediate result. Thank you.
Should we take a couple of questions? But because